hand raised. Do you have a question?
Did anybody have a question before we start?
Someone has their hand up. Anne Mascaluso? Okay.
I don't see it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we want to thank Tim so much for being here today. If you look at Tim Saternow's website, he says he paints with light and shadow and he makes the city quiet. And I love that. When you look at Tim's paintings, they're urban landscapes. They're mostly New York City, but I know he paints all over. He gives life and meaning and edginess to neighborhoods that you probably wouldn't think twice about as you were going through. And that's what makes his paintings absolutely magical. Tim is trained as a set and theater lighting designer. He also does very large architectural paintings. He's won a huge amount of awards. He is a signature member of the American Watercolor Society. He teaches at Art Student League and now at the Landgrove in Vermont. So if you want to take a wonderful workshop with Tim, he'll be up there in October. Tim's website is timsaternow.com. We are just so lucky to have him today. If your house is noisy, please keep yourself on mute. Tim welcomes your questions. If you don't mind putting them on chat, and then I will just relay them to Tim. Okay, and I think that covered everything. I will try to get Tim's notes in chat again while he's working so that everybody can see that. And now, Tim, I'm turning it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Margie. Thank you. If you look at your screen, you'll see a box that says Tim Studio. Yes. And if you go to that box, you can go up to the 3 little white dots in the blue field, and you can hit pin. And what that'll do is it'll fill your screen with what I'm doing. So it'll be much easier for you to see what I'm doing. We'll lose everyone else in the Zoom.
Do you want me to enlarge it for everybody, Tim?
Yeah, yes, Margie, that'd be great.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
Great. Beautiful. And I'm going to sort of work on the focus here because you have to remind it to focus occasionally. So I'll be watching that. Great. Great. As Margie said, a lot of painters consider themselves colorists, but I really don't start with color. I start with value. I start with light and dark, and it's usually sunlight and shadows. And that's what the demo today is going to be really about, is how I build up a painting from its value pattern into a painting. Today, I'm going to be using some research from Provincetown. And this is the piece of research that I'm going to be using for here. Just a little note, and I'm going to be talking about a whole lot of stuff, but in terms of research, the best piece of research is the photograph that's not a great photograph. If you try to duplicate one of those great photographs like a sunset or sparkly lights in Times Square, you almost can't make your painting better than what the photograph is. So my advice to you is find photographs that you can improve by painting. Right? And I'm always telling my students this: we are not here to duplicate the photo. We're here to interpret the photo into a painting that will be exciting for you and for everyone to see. This is one of those old buildings in Provincetown, and I've been doing a series of these. I have a gallery now up in Provincetown. So I send up my New York work and my Provincetown work. So just show a little bit about that. The first thing to do, I will take this and I will actually do a black and white copy of my research. And this will show me very quickly the value patterns. And of course, I chose this because of the sunlight streaking right across the face of this. And this thing here, this line in the center, that's actually a big sign. And it says the Old Colony Tap, which is a real grungy bar in Provincetown. But what I love about this is you don't see the sign, but you see the shadow of the sign just projected right down the side of this building. And that's what really attracted me to this as I was walking past it. So I had to quickly do a photograph of this so I can get that great shadow. And that's the shadow pattern, that's the value pattern that I'm sort of speaking about. And the first thing that I do is I take, let me see if I can do this here. I'll take a piece of trace paper and I'll lay it on top of my photograph. Now, I've already started this. I've done a bunch of these where I've already started. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the photograph and I'm just coloring in, I'm cross-hatching the darkest dark areas. And since I sketch a lot with pencil, this sort of diagonal hatching and I'm simplifying my photograph down to its absolute simplest elements. I'm trying not to put in any detail in this value sketch. I'm just sort of figuring out the shapes of all this. So I'll take it off the photograph and I'll put it behind a piece of white paper so that I'm left with just this sort of wonderful value sketch of dark and light, like that. And I'll take a look at it to see if this is exciting. I'll know at this point when I do this little sketch, and all I'm doing is tracing, if this composition of light and dark is going to be interesting to me. And this is what I really use before I do any of my larger paintings. My large paintings take upwards of a few weeks to a month to paint, especially the largest ones I do. So I want to make sure that it's going to be worth it. But I'm kind of looking at this, and once again, I love that diagonal that sort of cuts across this shadow like that. I like these shadows on the side, which are the buildings to the side of this building. But it needs a base. So I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to put in a cast shadow at the bottom. And this is something, once again, I'm just adding to my research. But it needs something at the bottom. Bring your eye back up into the painting. There we go. Now, just by putting this strange little triangle down at the bottom, it's already it's improved the painting tremendously. And all I did was just put in a dark shadow. It's a very formal painting that I've done, meaning it's almost symmetrical. So I need some elements that are going to throw off the symmetricality of this. And that light pole to the side of this and the shadow at the bottom is helping me sort of throw this off a little bit. Once again, no detail, just this value sketch that I'll take a look at. The next thing I'll do is I'm just going to quickly show you how I blow up my research onto paper, since people usually have a question about this. And what I've done here is I've made a grid, which I put on this piece of plastic. And I've gridded my photograph. Now this, you can put this grid directly on your photograph if you wish. But here, this is a better way to show you how to grid it out. And I will then take this. I'm gonna zoom up and down with my camera here so you can see what I'm doing. There we go. That's a little bit better. Great. So this is the half sheet of watercolor paper size. And this is a very quick transfer of the lines that I see in my research into these lines. I'm just going to explain the gridding technique, which is as old as the Renaissance. This is how they were transferring paintings back in Michelangelo's day. I do my grid, and this one here, it's a perfect square. So a perfect square here is going to match a perfect square here. And that's the secret of gridding up from a photograph. So what I've done is across the top, I have divided this into equal squares. This one here, I think, is only an inch square, 1.25 inches on my research. And on this, it's 2.5 inches. So that's what I figured out is the scale that I can blow this up to be. Then along the top, I number the grid lines, and down the side, I letter the grid lines. So that on my research, I have the numbers and the letters. So I can sort of go right to these quadrants and find the quadrants in the paper. And that's where I begin my drawing. So for this one here, I'll probably start right with the tip of this building, and I'll come to here and find that tip of the building. And then I'll come down here and find where this point is. Then I'll go over here to find this point. So then I begin to construct my lines by gridding up. Does anyone have any questions about gridding? This is fairly straightforward.
Are you
Very
gridding
good.
on tracing paper?
Yeah, this is tracing paper. So what I do is I have another piece of graphite paper, and I put that behind it, and then I transfer it onto my watercolor paper. Now, when I transfer it, not all the detail is there. I'll take my this is the very simplified drawing, and I'll begin to add more detail directly onto the watercolor paper. But once I get to this amount of drawing in the detail is actually quite easy then. I can put that in relatively quickly. Okay, so I have already begun this painting that I've transferred to my watercolor paper. And this is the layer of just value that I'm going to paint. This is my underpainting. And it's a cool word. It's called grisaille. And it's spelled like this, grisaille. It rhymes with the Palace of Versailles. And in French, it simply means gray or gray tone, a grisaille. In art, it means this sort of tonal background underpainting that is monochromatic. And in my case, I use Payne's Gray, a Winsor Newton Payne's Gray. And I love that color, especially Winsor Newton Payne's Gray, because it has a great blue quality to it, although it can get very, very dark. So this is a beautiful brand of it. I've tried every brand Payne's Gray that they have out there. And I found that the Winsor Newton Payne's Gray has the right amount of blue mixed into it. So I find that this is a lovely color. Now for this underpainting, you can use actually any color you want in terms of underpainting. When I did those paintings that I did out in the desert, it was too warm. Literally, the landscapes were just too warm. So all my underpainting was done in either Van Dyke brown or sepia. So I did an underpainting of a very warm tone. This idea of underpainting grisaille was really developed when they began using oil paints. And we're talking the 15th century. Van Eyck and Leonardo da Vinci, who, because the medium of oil paint was transparent and translucent, they realized very quickly that they could do a tonal underpainting and then simply put the color on top of it. And the tone is already there. So I'll show you how I put the tone on top of this, and what's happening underneath here is actually affecting the color that I put on top of it, since watercolor is a transparent medium with this. I don't know if anyone, 3 years ago, or it might be 4 years ago, sent over from the Uffizi was one of Leonardo's paintings that went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in Manhattan. And it was his painting of Saint Jerome. And what's fascinating about it is he never finished it. He never finished this painting. It's a underpainting of just his warm tones underneath it. And later he would then put in the color on top of it. But it was such a great thing to see that we could actually see Leonardo's underpainting and all the work he did underneath all the color before he put the color on top of it. So this is totally old-fashioned. It's not used a lot in watercolor. It's used a lot in very traditional oil painting. But I find it works very, very well in watercolor.
Tim, before you go on, a question about the size square that you were using.
Yes. What's your question, Margie?
How many inches, what size square is that you put over the painting?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many squares you put here, just as long as they're squares.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do is I transfer what I've done here onto the blank tracing paper. So when I started, this was just a field of squares. And I just made sure that the squares lined up with the proportion of the paper. So actually, Margie, to answer your question, what I started with first is the proportion of the watercolor paper itself. And this is a half sheet. So it's 15 by 22. So I know that is the size of that is the proportion of the paper that I would then do this. But the secret is just make sure that these are all perfect squares and that these are perfect squares, and you're able to transfer these around. So once again, if I go across the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you can see up here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When I was working in the theater, we would get an elevation, they call it elevation, which is about the size of the paper I'm holding here. The scenic designer would do this. Usually it was landscape, because we'd be painting drops. And we would take research about this size and then transfer it to a drop that was 50 feet wide. And we would do this through a grid. We'd grid both the research, and we put the grid on top of the top of the drop itself. And then we would just work in each square right across, drawing it out and then painting it out. And of course, when you step back, it all fits together into one big painting. So old-fashioned theater stuff here.
Works perfectly.
Yeah, it does. So I'm just going to take this out now and use my research without the grid. Right here. And as I've said, I've already begun to put in the different values of gray. And if you take one of my workshops, what we do is we start with, I'm just rearranging my table here a second. Hold on. There we go. We start with the darkest darks. And when I started this, I went in and painted the very darkest dark. Now, I'm actually breaking all the rules here of watercolor. Yeah. Because if you take in traditional watercolor, the traditional way is to start with your lightest tones, usually the sky. You sort of put the sky in way in the back, And then you take the next tone, like the mountains, which are a little darker, just a little dark, and then you paint the mountains in on top of the sky, and then you paint your trees in, which are a little heavier than that. You paint that on top. And that is sort of the traditional way of painting watercolor, which is starting with your lightest tones and working to your darkest tones. And what I'm doing here is I'm breaking all the rules because I'm actually starting with the darkest darks that I've already explored in my value sketch here. I'll just sort of put this around. The value sketch I keep close to me. Now, as you can see, even though I've almost completed this, I did interpret these as different tones where my value sketch is actually quite black and white. But as I come into here, I can then vary the tones of this so that it's a little bit closer to my research. But I'm still watching this one here because I like that value arrangement that I have here that I'm eventually going to put here. So what I'm going to do now is just continue painting this with my darkest darks. And of using these beautiful flat brushes. I paint a lot of architectural, so I find that I use my flat brushes the most. And I'm going to continue from this, and I didn't finish my window up here, so I'm going to paint in my darkest darks into this window. And then the tone below the window is not as dark, so I'm going to paint a lighter tone in the window below. And as I'm painting this, I'm always sort of judging about the amount of value that I'm painting into my painting. If this isn't coming through, I can zoom in. So if you want a closer, just ask for that and I can zoom in my camera. Why don't I try that? Are we constantly zooming in and out? Just sort of show you what I'm doing here.
That looks great.
Is that better?
That's wonderful.
Yeah. Someone's mic is on for the noise.
Yeah,
there.
if you're not muted, could you please mute yourselves?
Except when you want to ask a question.
Exactly.
I have a range of these beautiful flat brushes. So I don't skimp on the quality of paint. Winsor Newton is expensive
Not just now.
paint. I don't skimp with paper. This is Arch's handmade watercolor paper. This is 190 weight, although I usually use 300. And I'll just put some tone on top of this. Oh, I wanted to mention, so I'm part of a project with the American Watercolor Society where we are filming different watercolor artists that come in during our exhibit at the Salmagundi Club in April of every year. And we got a grant to begin to film these watercolor masters. So if you like YouTube, you can go to the dedicated American Watercolor Society channel and see a whole, I think we have 4 of them or 5 of them up now, of these master watercolor artists doing their demos at the Salmagundi Club for free. Very good. I'm trying to remember where else I needed to paint here. Oh yeah. So here I've done those windows. You know, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at my value and I see that my shadow up here isn't dark enough. So I'm going to go back in with this 1-inch brush and darken the shadow that I've already put in here. Put another layer of Payne's gray right on top of the Payne's gray I've already painted. I love these flat brushes. I can just get this beautiful straight line. And I need to cut into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually flip my painting around so I can come right back into this line. So I'm always seeing the edge of my brush instead of guessing what's under my finger or under my hand. Oh, that's much better. That's a much better shadow. And I'm going to come around to this side. Is the image large enough on your screens? Are you being able to see it correctly?
It looks good, Tim.
Great, thanks, Margie. Now, the reason why I started to paint this last night is you can see that this is the real work in the painting. This is the part that I really take a lot of time with.
The lines that we're seeing on the sides of the house, are those pencil or paint?
These ones here?
No, the boards.
Ah, the boards. Those are pencil. Those are a very soft pencil. I tried painting them. I've done a bunch of these clapboards up in Provincetown. And it gets too fat. It gets too fat. So I go in with a heavier pencil and do my shadows in pencil. And once again, I'm always turning my paper so that it's easier for me to see all this. There we go. Oh, that's a much richer shadow, isn't it? A little bit more up here. I use these, I don't know if you see, I'm using these bowls. They're Corel bowls that I get at Walmart. They're nice and heavy, so they don't move as I push them. And I paint so large that I find the large bowls to be really, really handy.
Excuse me, is it watercolor pencil or is it just a HB2 or something?
It's just an 8, yeah, it's actually a 4B pencil.
Thank
Just
you.
a 4B drawing pencil.
Okay.
Yeah, not bad. It's interesting though, I noticed the camera isn't exactly what I see here. So as I look up at what I'm doing, it looks much more rough in the projection here than it is in here on the paper. Okay, so I've really sort of finished my building. I'm going to go back in and darken my side buildings. And what I'll do is I'll do a graded wash of this dark. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water and pull this out so that I have a little bit more interest back in here. A little bit more dark paint. And then with just pure water, just pull it out.
Tim, next question came in. How long does an initial sketch take with all the detail before you begin to paint?
I love drawing, so I will spend a few days. And when I do my largest paintings, that's a lot of paper to consider. So it usually takes me about 2 days to finish drawing. And I really take my time and draw carefully. Part of that is because I want to, as I'm painting, I want to worry about the paint. I don't want to worry about the drawing of it. There's one more here that I've just begun, and I want to show you how I do a graded wash. We have this telephone pole here. I started it at the top, but I wanted to show everyone how I do a graded wash so that the telephone pole looks round. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to take my biggest brush and I'm just going to put a line of dark paint just down one side. And then I'm immediately going to come in with my water and build this little graded wash here. I'm just sort of touching the edge of that. And I'm just drawing out that edge. And here I'm just drawing that darker paint right down the telephone pole. And just drawing out that edge. Now, what you see as I'm coming back up here, this one is, the paint is following that edge, so I'm got to go back in and just lift up that hard edge. So I'm constantly softening the edge of this pole. So we get the illusion of three-dimensionality here. Yeah, pretty good. I spend money on paint and paper, and I only have a few brushes that I've spent a lot of money on. And I'm going to show you my expensive brushes here. These are called riggers. Does anyone know why they're called riggers? Any idea?
For the rigging lines
That's it.
for boat painters.
On a ship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is, these are the brushes that 19th century, 18th century artists that were painting ships
Right.
would use these to paint the rigging. This one is called a dagger. It's called a dagger striper. And this is the type of brush that they use to paint those cool lines on cars. They don't do that anymore. You know, when I was a teenager, what did they call it? Piping? Was it piping on a car? What's that? We're all the same age, aren't we? But the lines that they would paint along the side of hot rods,
Yeah,
they would
piping.
use this. Piping? Yeah,
Yep.
that's the word. Yeah. This one is not.
Striping.
I'm sorry? Striping. Yeah. This one is also very interesting. As you can see, it's nice and long. And the secret here is it has this very fat end to it. And that's what's going to hold a lot of paint in this. Same with this dagger. This holds a lot of paint, but the very tip of it is very, very pointy. So I get a beautiful point. I'm going to use this one here from Rosemary, this beautiful Rosemary rigger. And I'm going to try to paint these telephone lines. And this is one of the things of Provincetown that I love the best, is you have these beautiful old buildings, and then you have these awful power lines that are running all over the place. Now, if you look at this, if you look at my research, and this is the other thing I do, you'll notice that there's a strange sort of break here, and there's a strange sort of break here. I have taken this photograph, I put it into Photoshop, and I'm manipulating what I'm seeing on top of this. So I've actually moved the telephone pole and I've moved the wires so that they're a better composition for the final painting. Once again, I'm not using the real painting, or the real photograph that this is. I've taken a bunch of other photographs and put them in here. The secret of this is I will never show this painting with this piece of research next to it. So no one will know that I've faked stuff. So let me just show you how beautiful this works. Now, let me move my stuff around here. The secret of painting a straight line, and it's true with your flat brush as it is with my striper or my rigger, is I am pushing down on the heel of my hand all the time. The heel of my hand is what's guiding my brush, not my fingers. So I hold my brush steady and I'm actually dragging the heel of my hand across the paper. And that is what's going to give me control. So I'm actually painting from my shoulder, and that's what's creating these lines. So let me see if that'll work on this. So I have one chance to do this, so I better get it right here. Once again, I'm going to push down. I'm going to start at the edge here. And I get this beautiful line. I'm not going to make it as fat as it is in my research. The next one I'll do a little bit heavier, but I'll go back in now and put in all the sort of auxiliary lines that sort of come across like this. Let me go down to the side of the building here, because there's some wonderful, these wonderful sort of, it's a mess. I must tell you, Provincetown is a mess. Every time there's a hurricane, all the power lines come down. But look at the side of this building. There's all of these phone lines, I guess, and cable lines. But here I'm just going to put them in rather quickly here. And here I'm going to hold my brush even lighter so I get an even thinner line here. There's a strange sort of loopy thing here where it hooks into the building. These are a little bit heavier. So I'm actually going to use a little bit larger rigger. This one is a beautiful rigger from Rosemary Brushes, which is a company outside of London. Beautiful brushes. This one here is just my favorite sort of cheap Joe, my cheap Joe rigger. And this is going to make a little bit of a fatter line. So I'm going to try to make this fat telephone line or power line with this one here. Now I'm going to go back over again because I didn't charge my brush heavy enough. And I want these to be quite dark. So here I'm going to trust that I had a steady hand that I can actually put it right back on top of this. Not bad.
Not at all. It's amazing.
See, once again, I'm really pushing down on my hand, not the brush. I want to see it as it comes across that shadow. And as I get to the end here, I'm slowing down because the brush is actually running out of paint. But if I paint slower, I'll get the same amount.
Right.
We have another big fat one up here. Let me do the same thing here. I'll make sure that my brush is charged enough with this paint before I start. Here we go. So I guess it also requires a little bit of speed. If I slow down, the lines get a little wiggly. And this is sort of a big mess of power here. Right. I think those are fat enough. And I'll go back to my rosemary rigger here. That line was wet. I just smushed it. There we go. Not bad. Okay. I've already painted in, as you can see, I've already painted in the shadows of the lines that are coming across the building here. Okay, is there anything else more that I need to do? I don't think so. This is sort of the fun part now. And I'm gonna pull out my camera a little bit farther so you can see what I'm gonna do next here. Yeah, a little bit more so you can see the edge of the paper. Great. Now, in my notes that I sent you, I had a list of what I call my counterpoints. And I find that I need to, how do I put this? If you have any musical background, you have heard the term counterpoint. And it is where a certain tone or phrase in the music is repeated, but then something is usually played on top of it. It's a counter rhythm or a counter tone to the music that you have. Here I interpret it with my painting because I'm always looking for counterpoints in my painting. And in the list that you'll get sent to you by Margie, my counterpoints, as you can see, what I first start with, my counterpoints are light and dark. Light and dark, light and dark. The value is like my most important counterpoint to my painting. But I also have different variations of this. I have softness and sharpness. Softness tends to say that it's farther away. Sharpness tends to make that it's a little bit closer to us. I'll use cool and warm as a counterpoint. I already have my cool underpainting. I'm going to be painting warmer tones on top of this. I use color and non-color. So I use chromas and gray. And I'm also very aware of the counterpoints of my composition, where I have vertical lines that are counterpoint with these diagonal lines. And then you have these sort of wild horizontal lines coming through. So I'm very conscious of the structure of the painting, the composition of the painting, and what's sort of playing on top of it. And since it's watercolor, what's wonderful about watercolor is it's transparent, and I can play with it and not lose what's underneath it on top. So I'm going to do the really fun thing now, which is breaking this up. So the other sort of counterpoint I do is I will make it very crisp. This is a very crisp, carefully painted painting. For me, this is a little boring. You know, I've got to do something to sort of enliven the paint and really work with the painterly quality. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide some of this research here. And these are the other brushes that I've recommended on my brush list. These are called chip brushes. These are really cheap, cheap, cheap. You'll get them in the hardware store. You can get them at Home Depot. And they're really for like putting on glue on the floor and stuff. This is what carpenters use to put on glue or to very roughly put in material. These are not fine brushes at all. But what they're really great is they don't hold water. Because the next step on this is what I'm going to do is I'm going to splash a little bit of water. I've got to clean my space here so I don't get everything dirty. And I'm just going to use this and just splash some water right on top of the painting I just did. Right? Now, if I painted an area quite heavily, like this window here, it'll begin to bleed a little bit by itself. I'm going to help it a little bit here so you can see it. So that window is bleeding by itself, but everything else is not too. I'm getting a little bleed up here on my line here. Let me try a little over here, because I think this'll, but it's not really happening as much as I want to. So I'm going to go into my Payne's Gray, and I'm going to make a very light soup of the Payne's Gray. And I'm going to then go back over what I just threw down with just a very light Payne's Gray. So I'm actually breaking up the surface. Now, if it gets too spotty here, I'll just add some more water. And I got to make sure that this goes right off the edge of the page. Now, for me, this is much more interesting. It looks like a mess, but now I'm finding that there's just an energy to the painting that wasn't there before. So all I've done is just take my Payne's Gray and just spread a little bit of this Payne's Gray around. And I'm kind of careful. I'm not covering the whole thing. I know that there's sunlight here, so I don't want to upset the sunlight too much. That's sort of the first destruction that I do. And then I'll come in with one of my counterpoints. And I think for this, I'm going to use let's see, where's my colors here? I have this beautiful color. It's called brown ochre. So it's like a burnt sienna, but it's a burnt umber. But it's a little paler. But here's my warm counterpoint. And once again, this is very faint. And I'm just going to put this now on top of it also. I'm going to do it right on top of the blue that I just did and to the side of it. Now, for me, this is this is much more exciting. Now, generally, what I'll do is I will leave this overnight, but I'm going to bring out my hair dryer or my heat gun, and I'm going to dry it a little bit more quickly here. I'll be right back. I actually just went and turned on my air conditioning, so it'll be even drier in here. This is the best thing I've found lately. It's called a heated craft tool. It's by a company named Granger. And what I love about this is the sound. You can barely hear it, and yet it is quite a powerful heat gun. So I'm just going to heat up this for a while. And it's a good time to ask any questions or any observations that you guys see. This is literally watching paint dry.
Tim, when you come in splashing color,
Yeah.
Do you usually use your Payne's gray, and what other colors do you also come in with?
You know, I choose that warm color, usually based on what else is in the photograph. I will sometimes in my New York paintings use a very red brick color. And that is the second color I put down. For this, since it's Provincetown, there's not a lot of brick in Provincetown. I'm kind of taking a cue off the old siding that sort of just looks dirty. But this second color can be anything. And on a number of my paintings, I don't even use a second color. I just use the Payne's gray. It really all depends on the research and the effect that I want to get with this. So this is going to take a minute or two. If you want to grab a snack or take a bio break, this is a good time to do that.
Tim, this is Marion. I especially love the white space left at the bottom by where the doorway would be.
Yes.
Yes, so I love that. It draws your eye right in.
Tell me what you love about it. How does it work for you in terms of the composition?
Well, I think it solidifies what the image is supposed to be, but in a very loose way. There's where you were defining before your soft and harder edges. I think, that sort of brings me right in, and then right on up to where the shadows.
Yes. The other thing I speak about in my workshops is focal point.
Yes.
And I'm always asking people, hey, where do you want us to look? Right? I think I think one of the things that I do, that I think about the most as an artist, is I'm actually thinking about what people are going to think about when they look at my work. Is that weird? Maybe it's my theater background. Because in the theater, you're always working for the audience, right? You're doing these designs and effects because you're trying to communicate to the audience what the play is about. And I think there's a parallel when you're an artist, a painter. I'm thinking about what people are going to feel, I think. What are they going to feel when they look at my work? And it doesn't necessarily have to be very logical or complete. Because some people look at my work and say, you know, it reminds me of long ago. It has that feeling of age, of nostalgia maybe, that most people find very appealing.
Tim, where would you say your focus is?
Oh, I haven't even begun to do this. There is a red sign right in the middle, which I think is going to be the focus because it's red. And there's two reasons for that. It's dead center. And of course, the color red is always very attractive in terms of that.
And
But-
the white space of the door leads you right to it too.
Yes. Yeah.
Tim, those the wires, the electrical wires.
Yep.
I'm much too timid to do that. I think I would use a piece of masking tape in order to follow that line, which might make my hand quiver anyway. But to do them freehand, you are very brave and experienced.
Okay. I would try to practice. Well, you know, I've practiced doing this on scraps of watercolor paper.
Yes.
But once again, if my hand is pressing down on the surface of it, then my hand doesn't shake.
Okay.
And if you notice, I moved at quite a clip to draw them across.
Yes.
And that also helps me make a straighter line with that.
Thank you.
But yeah, with all my work, I'm always sort of pushing my hand down on part of my painting. I'm going to give this another few minutes here. And then I'm going to go in and lift up some of this. Actually, I'm going to do that right now. I use old t-shirts, and I know there's some places here that are really quite heavy. So I'm just going to go in and lift these up a little bit just to speed up the drying.
Someone wrote a comment that they love how you strive for perfection and then mess it all up.
You know, I've been asked now to judge watercolor contests. And I'm usually asked for a juror's statement. It's like, how do you judge art? Which I find really, really difficult. But there's three different ways that I look at a piece of art. And one of them is skill. Do you know how to handle the paint? Right? Do you know how to set up a composition? So that's kind of the nuts and bolts. And actually you can learn that. You can learn how to apply paint. You can learn the rules of composition. Here I think I'm breaking the rules. But there's a third part. There's a third part. And it is a very personal point of view. And I have seen paintings that are absolutely exquisitely perfect. Technique, oh, such beautiful technique. They're really rendering that apple to look like an apple, or that portrait to look like a portrait. But I also find that it bores me. I don't feel any heart in a lot of those paintings. So the third thing that I look for is personality. And you can make a great work of art, even if your technique is not perfect. Because if you make it your own, if you make it your own personal point of view, you will be much more successful. Which is why I sort of say, don't worry about duplicating a photograph. You know, the camera's already done the work. You don't need to repeat that. What I'm looking for is your own personality in the painting. What attracted you to this particular view? What actually makes it exciting to you as a painter? Because I think if you're painting something that you find powerful and that you find very personal, it will become a very unique artwork. And that's kind of the secret. Now, a lot of us, especially in my workshops, we're kind of worrying about technique. You know, you take workshops kind of to learn the nuts and bolts, right? That's important. It's important that you have a facility of applying the paint to the surface. But without that emotion behind it, I don't feel that the painting is going to be very successful. So I developed this kind of technique. I studied with a painter at the Art Students League named Paul Ching-Bor. That's Paul, and his last name is Ching-Bor. Paul Ching-Bor. You can find his work on the web. And he really introduced me into this idea of being able to throw paint onto an established painting and to see what happens with that. I've adapted his technique a little bit for the work that I do. Okay, we're getting close here. Now I have to clean up my table.
Do you stretch your paper?
No. No. Does everyone know what stretching paper means? Okay, in traditional watercolor painting, you would take your paper and you would submerge it into a tub of water. You would soak the paper in water, and after about 20 minutes, you would pull out this sopping wet piece of paper, and then you would put it down on a board, usually a piece of plywood. And you would either tape it to the plywood or you would staple it to the plywood. And what happens is you let it dry and the paper literally stretches into itself so that when you paint on it, the paper doesn't wrinkle. I remember seeing an exhibit of Andrew Wyeth's watercolors where on the side of the watercolor, you could see where he stapled the paper. So he would stretch it. I don't stretch the paper because I like the edge. And I show the edge when I display the paper. So I paint right to the edge. Okay, I think this is pretty dry. Not too bad. Great, I'm going to zoom back in here so you can see what my next step is going to be. So I'm going to work on the sky up here. Now, if you notice here, I'll zoom in even a little bit closer. Isn't that cool? There's a problem though. It is actually, it's too present. It's actually too bold. So I am going to take one of my scrubber brushes. Now these are once again, very, very cheap craft brushes. And I love these because they paint textures so beautifully. These are not made for watercolor, by the way. These are like, I don't know, these are kids' brushes, right? And what I've done is I've taken the brush and I've cut it short. So I've created this little bit of a scrub. And I'm going to take clean water and a clean brush. And I'm just going to put this water down very carefully. And I'm just going to lift up just the hard edge. Just to soften these down a little bit so they don't look too much like amoebas in the sky. And what I love about this watercolor, it's stained the paper. It's not going to disappear. But I can soften the edge. That's pretty cool. I'll pull out a little bit here again. And I'll do a little bit of work over here. Put down a little bit of water. And then with my cloth, I can pick that up. Now, some of these I'm going to leave because they look great. Some of these are a little bit too heavy. So I'm sort of picking and choosing. When you use watercolor, what happens is there's a capillary action where the actual grains of watercolor will run to the edge of a drip. And that's what's creating the hard line on these. Over here looks good, that looks good. A little bit down here. So I'm just putting down a little bit of water first. The stuff that's happening in the building, I really love. I'm not going to touch any of that. Soften a little bit of the street. Okay, let me zoom back out again. There we go. That's interesting. That's interesting. Still a little wet. I'm going to dry it a little bit more. When I go on workshops, I usually bring 3 or 4 of these because when everyone is using their hair dryer, you can't hear a thing. Okay. There we go. So now I'm going to begin to put in a little bit of local color. And when I use the term local color, I mean the color that the eye sees under sunlight. I think that's a good definition of local color. The color that appears under sunlight. I'm going to work on my pole first over here. And I'm going to start with a warmer brown. Bring out my little bit of Van Dyke brown. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to very lightly put this local color right over everything. Nice. There are these sort of strange red things that are in the window here. They're kind of the back of these. And what I did is I made a decision to actually light up the windows a little bit. So you see these red, it's sort of the back of the banquets.
Another question came in, Tim. You mentioned that you like to paint to the edge of the paper. How do you prefer to frame?
When I'm done with this, I'll show you some examples of how I'm framing my work now. I hate plexiglass. And what I do is I actually wax my watercolor paper and present the paper without any glazing, without any plexiglass or glass. And at the end of the workshop, I will show you what I mean by that. But I mounted onto wooden panels, the wooden painting panels that you can get from Blick, and just frame them very simply in a little floater frame. So this part of the process now is I'm just going around putting in the local color. The areas that I want bright, I've left white. The areas that are in shadow, there's a great little, let me see if I can get my brush here. There's a great red sign here. Let me get my good red paint out. So this sign is actually from another piece of photographic research I made here. Now, I had used that beautiful color. I kind of just discovered this. So it's called Winsor Newton Brown Ochre. And it's such a great dirty color. I'm going to use this because the sign up here is one of those really bad signs from the 60s. It's one of those plastic signs with the beer, and it's all yellowed. So Margie, you'd asked earlier, how do I choose my warm color? I really liked what was happening on this old sign. So that's the color that I used. It's that color that happens to old plastic. And it's actually not yellow enough for me. So I'm going to come back in with a little bit of yellow ochre. And just put the yellow ochre in places so I get a little bit more of that yellow quality, that old plastic. That's nice. These down here are old cedar shakes. So these are going to become the same color as I'm using the same color as my telephone pole. And what's interesting is with this technique that I use, I don't need a lot of color. And if you notice, as I'm putting my color on, I'm deliberately making it uneven. So I'm even more emphasizing the age of this building by breaking up the color that I'm putting on top of it. Yeah. Now the street's a little problematic because I want it to look like sunlight, but it's much too white. So I'm going to get a hold of my big brush here. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that warm tone just on the street. And there's a sidewalk, a bit of sidewalk in front. And I'm doing that same technique where I'm sort of breaking up. As I put my color down, I'm breaking it up. I'm not trying to make it even, but actually yeah, that's interesting. And then I'm going to put a little bit of this color into this building on the side. Even though in my research, it is a white building, I think it'll be much more interesting if I give it a tone of warmth. And this I'm painting right into this Payne's gray. And yet I'm shifting the cool into a warm. We have this great little drain here. I'm going to just give it a little bit of rusty color. Once again, that is not what's in my research. But I want to give it a little bit of personality here in the street.
How often do you vary what you paint from the research?
All the time. I really, you know, and I learned this from Paul Ching-Boer, who would come around and he would take our research from us.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say, now paint. Now look at the painting. Don't look at your research. Look at the painting. What does the painting need? How can you make it more exciting? Now, if you notice, this is a real white building, but I want to make it richer. So I'm going to use, once again, my big brush, and I'm just going to bring in some tone of warm into it. Let me see what would be a good color for this. Yeah. This is a beautiful raw umber. And I'm just going to bring some water in. So I'm painting right on top of my white clavards here. I'm just giving a little bit of tone. I'm painting right over that shadow. I want to get a little bit of warmth into that shadow. Lots of water, making this very soft. Ooh, that's interesting. Now here, just putting this little bit of tone in. I think it's so much more interesting than just the white. Now I know this is going to dry lighter, but I'm just going to go in and lift up just a little bit of it. It's really not, it's not a yellow building, it's just a dirty building.
Tim, I have another question.
Yes.
This is from somebody who said a year ago you recommended 15 pigments. Besides the brown ochre that you had mentioned, are there any others that you've since added to your palette?
You know, every once in a while, I'll find something, and it's usually at a workshop that some student has brought in. So I kind of discovered this brown ochre. And here, I'll show you my other discovery. I'm looking. No, I can't find them. Winsor Newton has put out paint charts that have a drop of the real paint, and it's on watercolor paper. So you can get these, I think they're about $20. They show the entire range of color. And I take a little bit of water and I just make a little bit of a graded wash next to the paint, and I can see what the paint is. You look at those printed color charts and you don't know anything about the color. This is real pigment that they send you just a little bit of, so you can see the exact color. And I had it somewhere and now I can't find it. If I come across it, I will show it to you. But that I find to be very handy, that I can actually look. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. Now this is becoming interesting to me. I'm liking the different shades of color that's coming through. I think the ground is still a little boring. So I'm going to come in with a little bit of warmer. A little bit of warmth down here. And I cannot take all the time that I would normally, but I'm going to start the sign so you can at least see what color the sign is. And what I've done to that is I've blown up my research a little bit so I can see a little bit. It's that really kind of fakey old, old Gothic lettering, but it's a great color. It's a real dull red. And here I'm using a color called Venetian red, which I think will work. I'm checking my color chart here. Yeah, let's try it. And this is where I have to put on my glasses. And very, very carefully paint in this Gothic. And I'm going to switch brushes here. I'm using also flat brush.
Tim, somebody asked what you're planning on doing with the sky.
I'll go right on to that next.
Okay.
I think
And
around-
somebody else said they love all the little bowls you're using. They seem to have quite a bit of pigment left. How do you
Yes.
store them and can you stack them?
Yes, yes to both of those. As you can see, I got this great cabinet behind me from IKEA, like, I don't know, 20 years ago. And they don't sell them anymore. It's just a big drawered cabinet on big wheels. And all my paint is stored right in here, right next to my easel. And of course, I paint with large brushes. So I put a bit of paint into each of these containers. And yes, you can stack them up. Now this is turning into an interesting color here. It's a weird sign. There's actually a little bit of yellow behind some of these letterings. So I'm not sure if you can see that. I'll zoom in again. So I will very carefully do all of that lettering, as you see here. And the lettering, I'm a stickler for correct, accurate lettering. And it really depends on the context. This is a building that's very well known in Provincetown. And I could just sort of, and I'm going to use the word, I hope it's not a racist term, but when I was working in graphics, they would call it Greeking. Does anyone hear that term, Greeking? It means you sort of put in lettering that is sort of the same size and shape, but it doesn't say anything. It's just nonsense, right? If you look at Edward Hopper's paintings, especially his famous one of like Early Sunday Morning, it's a line full of shops, but he has not very carefully written in all the names of the shops. He kind of has blocked it in. You know it's lettering, but it doesn't say anything. So you have a choice in terms of that. But for something that's so known, I'm going to be careful and make sure that the lettering matches the original for this one. Let's go on to the sky, because that is actually an important, I'm going to zoom back out here. That's an important element because in my research, what you notice is what really makes this sing is the fact that the sky is darker than the building. And I'm going to want to put a tone of something out here. And I haven't thought this far ahead. So I need to look at my work. I usually use cerulean blue. So I'm going to go back in with a little bit of cerulean blue, but I'm not going to paint it very evenly. So let's see. Clean my brush here. You can see my brush water gets dirty quickly, so I have all kinds of water here. Lots of water. Once again, I'm not too worried about doing it evenly. But I'm going to just suggest a little bit of sky. Now, if you've been working in watercolor, you know, you do a beautiful color, it looks so great, and then it dries. And you come back and say, what happened? There's no color there. So I know I'm going to probably have to come back into this sky again as it dries. But I'm going to be very careful about how much real tone I put into the sky. And as you can see, this one is, I'm being very, very light. Really kind of break it up. Right over my beautiful telephone lines.
Tim, another question. Your shadow suggests a very strong sunlight, but the soft sky you're putting in suggests clouds.
That is one thing I'm going to look at as I develop this painting. And that's actually a very important point where I might go back in and actually strengthen the sky based on that idea of sunlight. I'm going to do it in sort of careful layers. So this first layer that I'm putting down is quite light. And as you can see, I'm very quickly putting it in. But it also is very much a part of the quality of the rest of the painting. Painterly. It's interesting, what you're seeing on the screen and what I'm seeing is not, it's a little bit darker in real life here, but I'm going to go ahead and darken up some of the parts that I've already started, just to show you.
And that's the Winsor and Newton cerulean.
That's the Winsor Newton cerulean. Got to be careful with this stuff because it's a stain.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to lift up as easily. I like that. I think I'm going to leave that a little bit whiter up there. So we get sort of a little bit of cloud thought. I'm constantly looking and sort of evaluating what to do next, how much more to put on. And here I'm doing this guy actually much faster than I would normally do it. So I want to make sure that we get to an okay finishing point for this. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Here's a very important part of all of this. I've got to leave time that I just leave the painting sort of do its thing. Meaning I put it aside. I put it aside. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll stick it to my bathroom mirror. So when I wake up in the morning, I walk into the bathroom, turn on the light, and I'm surprised by my painting in front of me. And it's at that time that I can actually evaluate, oh, it needs more of this. Oh, it needs more of that. Oh, that's too much. So I'm constantly kind of going back in and reevaluating a lot of this sort of over the life of the painting. There's a pole next to this that I want to make sort of rusty. That's interesting. And the telephone pole is a little boring. I'm going to put a little bit of this burnt sienna into the telephone pole. I think that makes it much more interesting brown. So as you can see, I'm constantly kind of bouncing around. I'm now putting a little bit of that burnt sienna on top of those cedar shakes. I love this. If you look at the research, it's like down at the bottom, it's all like rotted. That whole line is like rot. Actually, what would be interesting now that I'm looking at it is to add a little green. Why don't we add a little green? One of my favorite greens is something called Davies Gray. It's very pale. I'm not sure if it's going to show up, but it is a green color that is, you got to be careful with your greens because they generally stain. Davies Gray does not stain. But if I put a little bit of this on top of this, ooh, I'm getting that good sort of rot color on top of this. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying not to be a slave to my research and kind of picking up kind of going with a little bit of intuition and have a bit of freedom. Oh, I think that's more interesting down there. Yeah. Now I'm looking at the building itself and I think I overdid the yellow. So I'm going to go back to one of my scrubber brushes and I'm going to lift up a little bit of that. So I'm actually scrubbing out a little bit of that yellow ochre. And yellow ochre is kind of a wonderful sedimented color that I know is not going to stain my paper. So I can have a little bit of freedom in terms of going in and lightening this up a little bit. Yeah, that's better. Now I'm also looking at it and I'm once again kind of glancing back to my original value sketch here. And I'm losing some of that power. You know, as you add color, the color actually adds value also. And I think my shadow needs a little bit more definition here. Now that's more powerful. There. And once again, I'm sort of judging this. I think this needs to be darker over here. I'll do my little bit of a graded wash again. I'm looking at the clock, Margie. It's 5 to 4.
Yeah, we should probably wrap shortly.
Yep. I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to show you how I'm mounting my paintings. So this is one of my New York paintings. And I have waxed this surface of the paper with something called cold wax medium. And you can see I've just glued it to the side of this panel. And then I'll put a very simple floater frame around the side. So this is how I'm selling my work now in my galleries. And I find it's a little more contemporary. I love the edge of the paper that you can sort of see down here, the deckled edge. It's not too fussy. I find that the watercolor paintings behind glass can sometimes get a little fussy. And this, once again, is just a panel. Actually, this one is stretched canvas. And that's how I'm presenting most of my
And
work.
the cold wax medium is something you brush onto it?
I use a putty knife. So this is the brand that I use. It's called Dorland's Wax Medium. It's kind of officially called cold wax medium. And I apply it with a soft plastic putty knife. And what I'll do is I'll take a little bit, it's like shoe polish, and I'll scrape it onto my painting.
And it's just one coat, does it?
Just one coat.
And it does not change the colors.
It's amazing. It does not change the color. It's simply beeswax with a little bit of petroleum-based medium in it. So it dries. Yeah, it's just a paste.
Huh.
And I kind of developed this when I was showing my work in New York City, and I wanted to present work that wasn't behind plexiglass. And I got to tell you, those plexiglass frames get really heavy and expensive. This is a little more work, but I think it really creates a nice presentation for a painting.
It does.
Now, when I show my work at the American Watercolor Society, they require that the work is behind plexiglass. And that is to protect the work because they move the painting so often. Okay. So I don't show my work like that at the AWS. Any other questions about this? I'm gonna look at,
We have a few questions that came in. What
good.
do you use for glue? Do you have to buff it or does it dry?
okay, two good questions. Like anything wax, if you buff this, it will turn shiny. So I try not to touch the surface at all. I want to keep the matte surface of this and not a shiny surface. But if I took a cloth and rubbed it on top of it, I would make it shiny.
Okay.
The glue that I use, believe it or not, is rubber cement. They have an archival rubber cement. I tried using a PVC, which is the water-based plastic glues, the white glues, and it warped the paper because it's water. The amount of glue would warp the paper, but rubber cement does not warp paper since it's petroleum-based. And you do it like you're old-fashioned, like you did in grammar school. You put glue on both sides, you let it dry a little bit, then stick it together. And when the stuff on the side that runs out the side, you let it dry and then you roll it up, right? So I use rubber cement. I'm telling you all my secrets, you know.
You are, and we are grateful. You're getting a lot of thank you so muches.
Oh, great. I'll look at these.
I'm saying it also for the group. Tim, you are incredible, a wonderful, generous teacher.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for doing this for us.
Very good. Maggie, you're going to send out that document?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Now, on the document is my website and my Instagram. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, great. But there's also my email. So if you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to drop me an email. Any questions you have about your painting. And hopefully next time I do this, we'll do it live.
That would be terrific.
Yeah.
That would be terrific. And I encourage everybody, look at Tim's website. He's got some great stuff coming up, and register for it. Everybody is saying best demo ever, and I agree. So Tim, thank you so much. I will send the recording out, so you'll have it, and Essex will have it as well.
That's very
All
kind of you.
right.
Thank you. Thank you, Margie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Tim, once again.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.